In a world of polished voices and practiced smiles, truth isn't measured by your platform. It's defined by your courage to stand when everyone expects you to bow. What happens when a 27-year-old conservative with unshakable conviction faces America's most powerful liberal voice? Not just a clash of ideas, but a battle for whose voice truly matters. The grand ballroom glittered with ethereal radiance, every crystal chandelier above the gala attendees twinkling like countless watchful eyes from the celestial realm. This was the prestigious Global Women in Media Awards in New York City, and the venue overflowed with celebrity journalists, cinematic royalty, and influential political figures. Spirited conversation blended with the delicate resonance of crystal glasses as guests networked over cuisine, aspiration, and refined ambition. Among them stood Meryl Whitmore, an imposing presence adorned in a cascading burgundy gown, her silver-streaked tresses arranged in a majestic updo. She had dominated television for 3 decades, renowned for her incisive interviews and liberal viewpoints. Tonight, she was claiming the Lifetime Influence Award, and her demeanor reflected it. Her smile was calculated, her rhetoric measured, but her self-assurance carried the gravitas of someone who believed this gathering belonged to her. Karoline Levitt entered without fanfare. She wore an elegant navy dress, minimalist, precise, and intentional. The understated gleam of a silver cross rested at her collarbone, not ostentatious, simply present. Her blonde hair framed a serene yet commanding expression. Though merely 27, she had already made history as the youngest White House press secretary and had recently unveiled a groundbreaking media platform centered on faith, liberty, and traditional values. She wasn't seeking applause. She was representing an emerging voice, one that frequently made gatherings like this uncomfortable. Karoline, a journalist from the Post, whispered, visibly startled. "What brings her here?" "She's presenting one of the honors," another replied, unmistakably displeased. Backstage, an event coordinator handed Karoline her presentation card. She was scheduled to introduce a promising documentary filmmaker who had spotlighted the overlooked narratives of working-class women in Appalachia. It should have been a moment of collective celebration, but when Meryl glimpsed Karoline across the venue, her subtle smirk transformed into a brewing tempest. As Karoline approached the podium, a hush swept over the room, courteous yet tense. Meryl occupied the front row, arms folded, one eyebrow subtly elevated. Karoline began, her tone composed and authentic. "Tonight we celebrate not only the narratives shared in privileged circles, but also those spoken from forgotten towns, humble churches, and family tables that never penetrate elite headlines." The applause was uneven. Some clapped enthusiastically, others wavered. Meryl's smirk reappeared. When her moment arrived for the acceptance speech, she rose with regal poise and glided to the microphone, offering Karoline a fleeting glance that harbored just a spark of contempt. "Thank you," Meryl commenced, "for this acknowledgement of authenticity in media, though nowadays truth appears selective, particularly when crafted by little girls with oversized microphones." The audience laughed, not unanimously, but sufficiently, for the reverberation to wound. Karoline remained steadfast, her gaze locked with Meryl's, and though she maintained her composure, the confrontation was only beginning. A few uncomfortable chuckles rippled through the ballroom, but the tension lingered like humidity preceding a violent thunderstorm. Me wasn't explicitly stated, but everyone recognized Meryl's target: little girls with oversized microphones. It wounded, deliberately so. Meryl, with her decades of media supremacy, had just drawn the initial boundary. Her presentation was velvet-encased steel, refined and effortless, but the purpose behind it was razor-sharp. Karoline remained unwavering. She reclined in her seat, her fingertips gently brushing the silver cross at her neckline. She'd confronted. Worse, aggressive reporters, ambush interviews, viral attacks. But what distinguished this moment was the smirking validation on numerous faces surrounding her. These were the same individuals who claimed to advocate for women's voices, just not hers. Meryl proceeded with her address, discussing integrity, principles, and media's obligation to confront deception, regardless of who wears the expensive suit. Several heads pivoted toward Karoline as if choreographed. She offered a slight smile, not amused, not defensive, simply resolute. She didn't interject, she absorbed. When the speech concluded, Meryl received a standing ovation. Karoline, applauded respectfully but briefly, then rose as the host approached her backstage. She proceeded. The host murmured, "Are you all right?" Karoline nodded. "I've been dismissed before." Backstage, her phone illuminated with countless messages from allies and conservative colleagues. "She just targeted you. Should we respond?" "She challenged the wrong person. Let us publish something." But Karoline didn't reply, not immediately. 10 minutes later, the host returned to announce a panel discussion titled, "Voices Across America, Media in a Divided Nation." To the audience's astonishment, the panel had been adjusted. Meryl and Karoline were now both featured. As the two women strode onto the stage and occupied opposite positions, the atmosphere in the room transformed palpably. Meryl still commanded the audience's allegiance, but Karoline possessed something different: preparedness. The moderator cleared her throat. "Let's commence with the topic of generational responsibility in media. Miss Levitt, would you care to begin?" Karoline accepted the microphone with tranquil confidence. "Certainly," she replied, eyes fastening on Meryl. "Tonight we've heard extensively about truth, but truth isn't generational property, and it's not earned through broadcast hours or accolades. It's something you champion, even when unpopular, especially then." The crowd grew silent. Karoline wasn't here to shout. She was here to challenge. "I may be young," she continued, "but I don't require a media empire to discern between genuine journalism and narrative manipulation." Meryl leaned back, lips compressed. The audience hesitated between applause and anticipation, but one certainty prevailed. Karoline had just initiated her campaign to transform the room. Meryl adjusted the microphone before her, her smile still composed but now tinged with strain. "Miss Levitt," she stated, her tone melodious, "I appreciate your fervor, but truth, authentic truth, demands time, experience, and perspective. It's not about who speaks most loudly or rapidly on social platforms." A polite chuckle spread throughout the crowd. Meryl's supporters relaxed, reassured by her trademark elegance. She had dedicated decades to commanding stages and headlines. She wouldn't be unsettled by a youthful press secretary with a silver cross and incisive rhetoric. But Karoline wasn't pursuing laughter. She sought something profoundly more significant. She leaned forward slightly, hands neatly clasped on the table. "Miss Street," she said, her inflection respectful yet penetrating, "you've secured your position through performance. I've earned mine through policy, crisis, and responsibility. You narrate stories, I confront reality daily. There's a distinction." The room shifted again, silence, then murmurs. Karoline didn't permit the moment to pass. She continued, "You stated this nation needs individuals who challenge falsehoods. I concur. That's why I speak out. But challenging doesn't equate to ridiculing. Doesn't mean labeling someone a little girl before a national audience then claiming moral superiority." Meryl's gaze narrowed. "I'm not a child," Karoline added, her voice unwavering. "I represent millions who've been similarly dismissed. People told they're too inexperienced, too devout, too traditional to merit serious consideration. But we don't retreat. Not anymore." The moderator intervened, sensing escalating tension. "Let's refocus on journalism's role." But the audience ignored the moderator. Their attention remained fixed on the two women now engaged in a subtle, high-stakes confrontation. Karoline had accomplished more than merely responding. She had exposed the subtext beneath Meryl's barb and transformed it into a rallying declaration. Backstage, social media exploded. The segment of Karoline stating, "You narrate stories, I confront reality," had already been edited, captioned, and uploaded by 3 political accounts, one boasting 2.3 million followers. The caption proclaimed, The instant Caroline Levitt silenced Hollywood's most prominent voice, and they were merely beginning. As the auditorium resonated with whispers, Meryl shifted uncomfortably, her polished composure strained beneath Caroline's words' impact. She reclined, eyes slightly narrowing as if reassessing. For decades, she had captivated rooms through presence alone, but Karoline had disrupted that influence with a single sentence, and Meryl recognized it. "Miss Levitt," she began, voice deeper now, less theatrical, more deliberate. "You discuss representing millions, but representation entails responsibility. Intensifying division isn't leadership. Provoking outrage isn't truth." Karoline remained motionless. Her gaze remained locked, steadfast. "With respect," she responded, tone composed but unmistakably assertive. "Division doesn't originate from expressing truth. It stems from silencing those who speak it. You mention responsibility, but what about accountability? You wielded your platform to belittle, not unite, and when someone challenges, suddenly it's labeled outrage." Some audience members gasped, others applauded. The statement resonated like a bell, pure, vibrant, irrefutable. Meryl smiled tensely. "If we desire unity," she countered, "we must transcend petty insults and political advantages." She leaned forward again. This time her voice was gentler but even more incisive. "You labeled me a little girl before the world. That wasn't unity. That wasn't transcendence. That was you reminding everyone that you believed I didn't belong, but I do." That declaration landed with unexpected force. The room froze, no movement, no whispers, just the rhythmic silence of an audience caught between discomfort and amazement. Meryl attempted to respond, but Karoline wasn't finished. "You see, I've participated in situation rooms with President Trump while media propagated chaos. I've answered calls from families whose sons never returned from overseas. I've confronted journalists who attempted to weaponize every statement. I've earned these scars, so pardon me if I don't collapse under a Hollywood monologue." The audience erupted, some applauding, others stunned into silence. Meryl's expression shifted, not to anger but to something more complex. Acknowledgement. "Surrender?" From the back row, a young woman clutched her phone, messaging her sister. Karoline just transformed the dynamics. Meryl's no longer central, and she wasn't. Karoline settled back, composed, her silver cross capturing the spotlight, no longer a peripheral emblem, but a quiet manifestation of fortitude. She hadn't merely countered the insult, she had claimed the platform. The moderator cleared his throat, voice unsteady. "Shall we proceed to concluding remarks?" But clearly the conversation had already evolved. The moderator paused momentarily, surveying the crowd as if uncertain whether to advance or allow reflection. But Karoline had already assumed control. Her words lingered like smoke, dense with significance impossible to disregard. Meryl, ever the seasoned performer, adjusted her posture, folding her hands delicately in her lap. The smile she now displayed was thinner, calculated. "You're articulate." "I'll concede that," she remarked, her tone smooth but with underlying tension. "But speaking effectively doesn't equate to speaking wisely. There's peril in rhetoric, particularly when it generates more heat than illumination." Karoline didn't hasten to respond. Instead, she addressed the audience directly, examining the faces, some beaming, some uncertain, all expectant. "Heat," she echoed softly, then redirected to Meryl. "Sometimes heat is precisely what's required to melt the frost surrounding truth." The crowd stirred, the metaphor resonated profoundly. Karoline leaned forward slightly. "You mentioned earlier that leadership involves elevating others. I agree, but it commences by not initially looking down upon them." The audience murmured louder now, shifting energy throughout the room like a turning tide. Even the moderator glanced toward Meryl, almost expectantly. Meryl maintained her stance, but her shoulders tensed. "I never condescend," she insisted, her words' edges sharper now. "I've utilized my platform to advocate for women, children, the marginalized." "And that's admirable," Karoline interjected swiftly. But when you dismiss a younger woman before millions simply for disagreeing with you, when you label her a little girl instead of engaging her ideas, that's not advocacy. That's hierarchy disguised as feminism. A subdued gasp permeated the audience. I attended tonight not merely to defend myself, Karoline added, but to represent millions of so-called little girls instructed to await their turn, moderate their tone, or conform. I refuse these directives, and they shouldn't be obligated either. Silence enveloped the room again, this time weightier than before. The moderator, recognizing the moment's gravity, slowly nodded. Powerful sentiments, Miss Levitt. Miss Streep, would you care to respond? Meryl observed Karoline, this young, astute, unshakable woman seated opposite her. For the first time that evening, her response didn't arrive promptly. Instead, she reached for her water glass, took a deliberate sip and exhaled. No, she finally admitted, her voice softer. Not yet. That silence communicated more eloquently than any retort. Karoline settled back again, her expression composed but her gaze unwavering. She had accomplished more than surviving the confrontation. She had altered the dynamic. This wasn't merely a debate anymore. It had become a reckoning. The moment suspended like a symphony's final note, vibrating unresolved yet impossible to ignore. Meryl's silence, her simple, not yet, resonated more profoundly than any response she might have crafted, and the audience perceived it. The moderator glanced between the two women, uncertain whether to intervene or allow the silence to deepen. But the room for once wasn't restless, it was captivated. Karoline adjusted the microphone before her slightly, then addressed not Meryl but the audience. You see, when someone with authority pauses, she remarked gently, when they withhold words instead of rushing to fill silence, it indicates contemplation. It signifies they're grappling with what was expressed. Some audience members nodded, others simply observed. Tonight wasn't about attacking, she continued, though I anticipated headlines would portray it thus. Came for dialogue, not exclusively with Meryl, but with viewers who tire of being told experience equals wisdom and youth equals ignorance. She paused, her fingers tracing the table's edge. I was taught to respect individuals, not titles. I've been underestimated in every environment I've entered since 19. I've been deemed unqualified, excessively ambitious, opinionated, vocal. But I've also been correct more frequently than I can enumerate. Quiet applause emanated from the stage's right side, then increased from behind. Karoline's voice lowered, slightly, becoming personal. And believe me, being right while being young is among the loneliest positions possible, because it compels others to confront truths they weren't prepared for. The crowd grew louder now, some rising. Cameras flashed. Social media already featured trending hashtags. Across from her, Meryl remained silent, but her expression had softened. Something in Karoline's words had reached her, not as an adversary but as a woman, a leader, someone who once fought for her voice amid judgment. The moderator leaned forward, his voice steady. Miss Levitt, you've evidently struck a chord. Would you say you're attempting to redefine power's appearance in this generation? Karoline smiled, not smugly, but with quiet conviction. I'm not attempting to redefine power, she replied. I'm attempting to remind people who truly possesses it. The audience erupted. Applause cascaded like thunder through the studio. It surpassed a verbal contest. It was something greater. A shift, a fracture in the structure. In that instant, Karoline Levitt transcended being the youthful press secretary on defense. She became the voice of a generation tired of silencing. Backstage. Following the broadcast, the atmosphere buzzed with extraordinary energy. Staff scrambled, producers whispered, and camera operators verified their footage, already preparing segments for evening news. But amidst this chaos stood Karoline Levitt. Composed yet undeniably transformed, she'd confronted Meryl Streep, a cinematic icon, a cultural force, and emerged not merely unscathed, but triumphant in unprecedented fashion, not through shouting, not through personal attacks, but by wielding truth like a blade, precise, sharp, and controlled. Outside CNN headquarters, a small crowd had assembled. Reporters with handheld microphones pushed toward the velvet barrier, shouting questions. Karoline, did you anticipate that reaction? Did you intend to silence Meryl? Are you considering political candidacy? Karoline hesitated at the glass doors, her reflection gazing back. Her navy blue blazer remained immaculate, the silver cross at her collar capturing the light's soft radiance. The same cross that once sparked courtroom controversy was now a strength symbol. She approached the press line and raised a hand, not waving, but requesting silence. Surprisingly, they complied. I didn't come to triumph, she stated firmly, eyes connecting with the nearest camera. I came to remind America that truth isn't age-dependent, and silence confronting it doesn't indicate wisdom. It signifies complicity. With that, she departed past reporters into the waiting black SUV. Phones instantly activated. Karoline Levitt. Quotations trended on X. One clip featuring her saying, "Truth isn't age-dependent," garnered 2 million views before midnight. Meanwhile, inside the studio, Meryl occupied her dressing room, contemplating her reflection. She wasn't angry. She wasn't shaken. She was thoughtful. She was prepared. She informed her publicist she wasn't performing for applause. She was performing for legacy. At the White House, Trump observed the footage repeatedly in the Oval Office. "Summon her," he instructed his aide. "Tomorrow." His voice carried an unusual quality. Respect, genuine appreciation. That night, as Karoline rested, her phone illuminated with messages from governors, legislators, and conservative influencers. She realized something had shifted. She no longer represented merely a spokesperson. She was becoming a symbol of conviction, youth, unapologetic truth. She opened a message from a 19-year-old political science student. "You made me believe I can speak up. You made me believe I matter." Karoline smiled, eyes slightly moist. This transcended a moment, it represented a movement. The following morning, Washington, D.C. pulsated differently. The atmosphere itself seemed sharper, more alert, as if the capital had just awakened. Across networks, newspapers, and social platforms, Karoline Levitt's name wasn't merely trending. It represented a cultural catalyst. At 8:02 a.m., Karoline entered the West Wing with a stride both effortless and authoritative. Staffers acknowledged, secretaries whispered. She proceeded directly to the Roosevelt Room where President Trump waited, arms crossed, smirking like someone who foresaw the outcome. "You succeeded," he stated simply. "I haven't witnessed someone silence Meyer Street since—" "Well, never." Karoline offered a brief smile but didn't gloat. "I didn't silence her," she clarified. "I presented her the choice to speak or withdraw. She chose silence." Trump nodded approvingly. "You're no longer merely a spokesperson, Karoline. You're becoming the message." Meanwhile, inside Meryl's Upper West Side townhouse, the actress sat at her kitchen counter, tablet displayed, watching previous night's broadcast clips. She observed herself retreat, watched Karoline maintain position, watched public reaction. On a morning program, one liberal host attempted to reframe the narrative. Meryl demonstrated grace under pressure, she needn't stoop. But another co-host interrupted. Perhaps she was simply out-argued. Let's not confuse poise with passivity. At that moment, a notification appeared on Meryl's tablet, an open letter published in The Atlantic entitled, "The Night Karoline Levitt Rewrote." The rules. It stated, "What we witnessed last night wasn't merely debate. It represented seismic change, youth challenging legacy, clarity eclipsing prestige. Karoline Levitt entered hostile territory and didn't roar, she reasoned. And consequently, she demonstrated that in America, respect is earned not through status but through courage." Meryl reclined, exhaled, and closed the tablet. That afternoon, Karoline conferred with White House communications staff to compose her statement. She avoided gloating. She wanted to remind. Her final quotation read, "Last night wasn't about winning verbal warfare. It was about proving that anyone, regardless of age or background, can speak truth to power and compel attention." The statement reached every major network by evening. That night, conservative rallies featured placards stating, "Karoline represents us." On X, the hashtag #DasLevitt effect trended globally. College students shared videos declaring, "I previously feared classroom participation, not anymore." And at an Iowa cafe, a middle-aged woman placed her hand on her daughters and said, "This exemplifies leadership we've awaited." Karoline stood at her office window later that evening. In the illuminated Capitol against darkness, she didn't feel victorious. She felt responsible. Her phone vibrated with Trump's message, "You're not merely our future, Karoline. You're our present." She didn't respond. She simply observed her reflection in the glass. The silver cross at her collar gleamed faintly, no longer merely a faith symbol. Now it represented strength. The media tempest didn't subside following the press conference. It intensified. Karoline Leavitt's confrontation with Meryl Streep transcended viral status. It now symbolized America's cultural conflict. Conservative voices proclaimed Karoline as silencing Hollywood arrogance, while liberal commentators accused her of disrespecting an American icon. But Karoline remained steadfast. She anticipated the tempest, and she was prepared to navigate. That night she occupied her White House office, solitary except for a desk lamp's gentle hum. On her phone, numerous emails and messages illuminated. Supporter praise, interview requests, angry criticism from celebrity outlets. Trump himself called earlier, his voice resounding with approval. "You didn't merely stand ground, you dominated. That's why I selected you." But something deeper stirred within Karoline. She reviewed a thread titled, "Real America Speaks." One post captured her attention, an Iowa mother thanking her for defending traditional values in an environment where Hollywood lectures rather than listens. Another came from a retired veteran. "You expressed what we all feel but fear voicing." Karoline reclined, absorbing those words. It transcended Meryl. It concerned people, the overlooked, and she had become their voice. Suddenly, a call arrived from Texas's governor. "Karoline," he said, "we're organizing a town hall addressing free speech in media and entertainment. We want your leadership." Her mind raced. A televised forum, live debates. She no longer merely responded to conflict, she shaped the narrative. The following day, she flew to Dallas. Arriving at the crowded venue, cameras clicked and reporters swarmed. "Miss Leavitt, what message do you have for the entertainment industry?" one shouted. She continued walking but replied distinctly, "Art is powerful, but so is truth, and truth deserves equal amplification." Inside, she mounted the stage. A massive screen behind her illuminated with "Voices of the People, Truth versus Celebrity, Power." As lights dimmed and the audience hushed, Karoline adjusted the small cross at her collar and smiled. She no longer merely answered questions. She posed them, and America listened. As the event hall gradually emptied, applause echoes lingered like persistent memories. Karoline Leavitt stood near the stage, surrounded by reporters requesting statements, but she no longer focused on microphones or flashing cameras. Her eyes followed Meryl Streep, now seated alone, shoulders slightly hunched, eyes heavy with the weight of an evening she believed she could control. Karoline inhaled slowly and approached her, not triumphantly, but purposefully. Her tone lacked malice as she said, "You're among America's most celebrated women, Meryl, but even legends forget they don't possess truth." Meryl looked up, lips tightly pressed, struggling to summon the composure she wore confidently on stage hours earlier. "I didn't anticipate that," she admitted, voice low. "That's the issue with anticipation," Karoline replied gently. "It frequently blinds us to reality. You perceived me as a partisan mouthpiece, but I'm more. I'm a woman with convictions, history, and purpose surrounding them." Some remaining audience members suddenly paused, observing the exchange. The once fiery debate had cooled into something profoundly human. Two women, decades apart in age and experience, stood in battle's quiet aftermath, no longer adversaries, but figures in deeper conversation. "I intended to challenge your policies," Meryl finally said. Not your character. Karoline offered a half smile. But you did both, which prompted my response. We can debate politics endlessly, but when we begin mocking faith, experience, or people we've never encountered, we're no longer debating. We're diminishing one another. Meryl nodded slowly. Perhaps I needed reminding. Karoline extended her hand. Then let this mark beginning, not conclusion. The actress observed it, hesitated, then accepted. Cameras flashed again, capturing, not viral conflict but something rarer, resolution. Later that night, Karoline sat at her White House desk. The silver cross necklace she wore had become somewhat symbolic in media. Some called it defiance, others called it hope. To Karoline, it represented her compass. A message appeared on her screen from the president. You succeeded again, Karoline. You didn't merely win debate. You reminded the country why we fight with strength and grace. She smiled. On her desk, a new framed quotation stood beside her. It was a line she improvised on stage that night, now circulating online as a trending hashtag. I don't require applause to be right. I merely require truth to stand. Outside her window, Washington shimmered with late-night illumination, alive with stories, struggles, and countless voices seeking recognition. And somewhere amid that vast cacophony, Karoline Leavitt's voice had established its place, not by shouting loudest but by speaking courageously when it mattered most. In a world where power often speaks loudest, Karoline Leavitt reminded us that clarity, conviction, and courage still penetrate noise. She didn't enter that stage to impress audiences or pursue headlines. She defended truth, principle, and civil discourse's dignity. Meryl may have believed she owned the spotlight, but Karoline proved that genuine leadership isn't about performance. It's about purpose. This wasn't merely generational or ideological clash. It exposed what happens when confidence meets conscience ultimately. Karoline didn't merely win the argument. She won the room, she won the silence, and she won respect from those recognizing that integrity always outshines arrogance. Because sometimes the youngest voice communicates the oldest truth.